I was looking for a subject to write about, and I thought, well, maybe a coal mine strike. Both my parents came from industrial towns in Utah, and my mother from actually the coal country. And I'd heard some stories, and so I started plowing around, and I found a little pamphlet written by the Colorado National Guard, and it turned out to be a bit of a whitewash of their participation in what came to be known as the Ludlow Massacre. And in the midst of this, I found that the head of the tent colony at Ludlow was Louis Tikas, Louis the Greek. Well, because I have a Greek background, of course, that interested me. And I asked my mother whether she'd ever heard of him, and she said no, but she called the coffee house, a Greek coffee house in Helper, Utah, and someone picked up the phone. She asked him in Greek. Oh, yes, he said, we know about Louis, our brave, and he used the Greek word for general, strategos. And so I began to piece together his story. There's a picture that I have of the basement of the little house in Crete that Louis grew up in. And in the basement there is an olive press. An animal, a donkey or a mule or a horse would turn a millstone and press the oil out of the ripe olives. And this was about the level of an industrial machine that these young Greeks would have known about when they came to the United States, which was the most highly industrialized country in the world. So everything was new to them. The laws, industry, none of them had heard about a labor union, and they were suddenly thrown in the middle of a major strike. Louis Tikas, before he became a labor organizer, had a little coffee house, and these were the places where the Greeks would gather to be with their own people, to learn the latest news, to play a little tavli, which was backgammon. Denver was a dry town at the time, so no liquor, but they would have Turkish coffee. They called it Greek coffee, of course, and a little ice cream, maybe, and pass the time. It's a very lonely experience to be an immigrant. The earliest immigrants in industrial America at that time were often recruited as strike breakers or scabs, and they didn't know what was going on. They didn't know what unions were like, and they were very, very hungry. And this is what happened to a group of Greeks who found themselves in 1912 up in Frederick, Colorado, in a mine that was on strike. And the conditions were pretty awful. They were virtually living in a stockade. They couldn't get out. All they could do was work in the mines. And so somebody said, we better get hold of Louis. And they got the word to him down in Denver, and he came up to Frederick and got a job in the mine. He ended up leading all of those Greeks out of the mine and right over to the United Mine Workers office and signing them up. And then after that, he became a full-time translator and organizer for the United Mine Workers. Ludlow was the biggest of the tent colonies, and the Greeks were they were a little minority within that colony. They were kind of clannish. They stuck to themselves. A lot of the other miners thought they were kind of arrogant braggarts, and they were clannish. They didn't have a lot to do with the other people. But Louis was a different kind of person, and he'd shown this even in the coffee house. I think all these immigrant groups would have people in every little town, in every situation, that were just a little bit quicker to catch on to how things work, to learn the language, to know the ropes. He became kind of the mayor of this Ludlow tent colony. The strikers had hung on through this very bitter winter, and there was a lot of bad blood between them and the National Guard units that had remained. Now it was spring, and the Catholics in the camp, the Italians and other Catholics, had their Easter celebration, and the Greeks, the Orthodox, run on a little different calendar. So more often than not, Orthodox Easter is later, and it came a week after Catholic celebration, and the Greeks were determined to have bang up Easter, and so they put together a party. They claim that they procured, that's the word that they used, some lambs. They, bought a couple of barrels of beer, and they had a celebration. Many of them put on their old country black baggy trousers and did their dances, and played their various instruments. And toward the end of that evening, some drunken National Guardsmen came over and said some things that were taken in retrospect to indicate that there was going to be a plan for some kind of attack the next day. I don't know that it's true or not. I kind of doubt it. But anyway, the next day, Louis was called to meet Major Hamrock over an incident, and this is the kind of thing that was always happening, where the militia claimed that a man was being held in the camp against his will. And so Louis had to go and straighten it out. But he was a little worried because of the tensions. And so he said, look, I'll meet you between the National Guard camp and Ludlow. And there was a little shack out there in the midst of the two camps, and that's where he and Hamrock met. While they were talking, there's the sound of an explosion, and Louis looks out, and he can see men running from the Ludlow camp into a railroad cut to the north of it. Yeah, I believe it's to the north. And what's going on? And he pulls out a white handkerchief and starts running toward the camp. I'm going to stop them, because he didn't want any shooting to start, but apparently it had already started by the time he got there. So that day, he spent his time running ammunition to the strikers, who were, I think, attempting to flank the machine guns that the National Guard had brought down from their headquarters and had planted in range of the tents. That's what the strikers had seen. So Louis was running ammunition and water and food to these men, but he also knew that under the tents, women and children were hiding. They dug pits under a number of the tents for storage. And he and a miner's wife named Pearl Jolly, who a very courageous woman, she put on a red cross, pinned a red cross on her dress, and they kept trying to get water and food to these trapped women and children. The shooting went on all day. Toward dusk, somehow the camp was set on fire. Various accounts. Some said it was deliberately fired by the National Guardsmen when they got down to that part. Others say that, machine gun fire had knocked over a stove. Really, it was such chaos. No one really knows what had gone on. But anyway, the camp was on fire. So Louis goes over to the National Guard lines with a big white flag saying, we've got to stop it, we've got to get these women and children out. And unfortunately, he's captured and he's taken to the maybe bitterest enemy strikers, and that's Karl Linderfeld. He's one of these guys who had served in the Philippine insurrection. He was kind of a professional mercenary type, not a real soldier, I would say, more, a man with a gun. Linderfelt smashed his rifle across Tikas's face, dropped him, and then said to three men, "You guys take care of it." They'd also captured two other prisoners from the strikers' side, and the men holding them at a certain point that night told them to run. These guys ran toward the tents. They were illuminated by the fire, and they were all shot in the back. The miners put on their red neckerchiefs. Townspeople who were behind them put red neckerchiefs on, and the National Guard was really almost driven out of southern Colorado. And there was brutality in revenge from the miners. The worst of it was finding a shack that some Japanese strikebreakers were living in and burning it and incinerating these poor guys. But they dynamited mines. They killed mules. They just went wild, and it was only ended when Woodrow Wilson sent federal troops in and put it down. But after that, the Union was broke. They gave up the strike essentially, and many of the strike leaders were blackballed and would have difficulty finding jobs in Colorado for many, many years. There had been these industrial battles, vicious industrial battles, since really just shortly after the Civil War, and it just had to do with a collision of two forces, and nobody really there to mediate. It's just a period of two colliding views of economics and what are the rights of the workers and what are the rights of the capitalists. But this all was a feature of the United States until the Franklin D. Roosevelt administration and the Wagner Act that gave protections to union organizers, and then the National Labor Relations Board and the mechanisms that we know today. And so there are strikes today, but they rarely reach that level of violence. Maybe it was important for me to write this so I could sort of see through that kind of mask that the other person often wears to us. We don't understand their language, we don't know where they've come from, and we just see a kind of mask, an immigrant mask. And I felt that maybe I worked through that a little bit by writing the book. At least that's the spirit in which I hope it's read.